Hey everyone, this is Matt. I'm back with another Activate tutorial on creating games in GameSalad. Today we're going to create this game called Smog Cloud Madness. It's pretty sweet, so get excited. This is an intermediate level tutorial, so I'm expecting that you've already worked through the beginning level material. I'm going to move pretty quickly since we have a lot to cover, so some of the initial concepts, I'm expecting you to know them already. This is a video companion to the PDF written version of the tutorial, so you're free to look back and forth between them. Let's go ahead and get started. You're going to need, of course, GameSalad, which you should have already, and the folder of resource files for Smog Cloud Madness. So first of all, let's take a look at the game and see what we're dealing with. This is the game right here, and the way it works is you can use the arrow keys to move a series of raindrops around simultaneously, and they're moving through a maze made of clouds and trying to dodge the smog. No word on if the smog causes madness or if it's madness to try to evade the smog. I don't know which, but anyway, that's the idea. It's a maze game, and you're controlling multiple characters simultaneously. So we have a lot to work with here, and by the end of this tutorial, you'll have made your own version of this game. So look forward to that. Now let's get started. The first thing you're going to need to do is open up a blank project. So here's mine. And pretty quickly we'll go ahead and give a title and set the platform. I'm going to use GameSalad Arcade in this case. And we'll dive right into it. Double click on Initial Scene and open up the scene view. Just as a quick reminder, this black box here is your actual game screen, and then we can create the objects in our game in this section and use assets and create behaviors and so on in this section. So the first thing we'll want to do, speaking of assets, is import the images that we'll need. So click on the Images tab and then open up your file of resources and look for a series of images. It should look like this. And choose them all and drag them right into GameSalad. And you'll see they've now been imported. But of course on their own they don't do anything. We need to make actors with the images attached. So now I can select all of the images here and drag them into the Actors tab of the inspector. And there we go. So now we have a series of actors with the images attached. So we're ready to start. And of course the first thing we'll probably want to do if we're going to create this game is make some clouds. So we can drag the cloud actor into the screen. And since the primary interaction of the game is moving the raindrops around within the walls of the clouds, the first thing we'll want to do is create the interaction between the raindrop and the cloud. So first we need a wall of clouds. And there are a couple ways you could do that. One is to create multiple copies of the cloud actor. These are instances of the cloud prototype, which is up here. And if you do that, you can position them really carefully and get a really nice, looking effect like that. But that takes a long time. The other thing you can do is these little circles on the edge of this actor instance, you can drag them, and that stretches the image, which is fine, and that's a great technique because it's very fast. So if you just need a quick job, that's the way to do it. But you'll see it doesn't look very good. It's kind of ugly. It doesn't look anywhere near as nice as this. And the reason for that is that we've distorted the image because the image is this size, but we've stretched it to fill this size, which is all right, but there is a special technique that we can use that will still make it look nicer without us taking the time to do lots of copies of the cloud. And that technique is called tiling. So I'm going to move through this quickly, but the basic idea is that remember that there's a difference between the actor and the image. The actor is the thing that we're actually changing the size of in the scene, but the image is a cover for the actor. And because the image is a cover, we have options for how it covers the actor. So if we can double click on the cloud actor, look in the list of attributes and scroll down to graphics and click this arrow to expand the graphics category. And most of those we don't need, but look at these. These are called horizontal and vertical wrap. These control how the image that's attached to the actor is covering the actor. And you can see the default is stretch. So that's why the image was distorted. It was stretching one copy to cover the entire actor. But we have other options. We can choose tile. And if we choose tile for horizontal and vertical wrap, and now we click back, you can see it looks much better. Excuse me. There are multiple copies of the image covering the actor, but if you click on it, you can see it's still just one actor. It's not multiple ones. Now this has its own disadvantages. You can see if I change the size of the actor, over here on the right, we just have a fragment of cloud. That's because there was enough room to start making another copy of the image, but not enough to finish it. But this is a nice balance between just doing the one stretch that looks terrible and taking a long time to do it all manually. So you can decide whether you're satisfied with this or if you want to take the time to produce something like this. Either way is acceptable. Just remember the quality, the quality will be reflective of the time you put into it. And you can see because we set the vertical as well, we can stretch this like that and it does the same thing. So tiling is very cool and you should use it. Now we need a raindrop. So drag that into the scene. And if we run the game right now, it's not going to do anything because we haven't given any instructions. So the first thing we'll want to do is make the raindrop move. And so open up the raindrop actor and drag. If you go into the library, click on the behaviors tab and scroll down until you find the move behavior. It's alphabetized. So find the move and drag it into the scene. And now if we run the game, you can see that the raindrop moves on its own, which of course is not what we want. And the reason it's doing that is because all we've done is tell it to move. We haven't given it any context. What we actually want the game to do is have the raindrop move only if we tell it to move. And the way we'll tell it to move is by pressing a key. So we'll use the arrow keys for that. And probably right now it is best to start with one of the keys. And so the way to do that is if you want to tell a condition for a certain behavior, then you would create what's called a rule. So click the Create Rule button, and now we can specify the condition. So actor receives event just means that the actor, which is the raindrop in this case, is sort of paying attention to the state of the game and checking for something to happen. And so we can change mouse position to key. And now there's a button you can click to get a keyboard pop up. And we can click a key. So we'll start with up. And the default is down. So now this is saying if the raindrop notices that the up arrow key is pressed. And we can move the behavior into the box. So now it will only move if we press the key. But if we try that, I press up, it moves to the right. And the reason it moves to the right is because the default behavior for the move is to go in the direction 0, which is an angle of 0, so that means it's straight to the right, because it's against the x-axis, which moves to the right. And you can see the dot here on the circle is pointing to the right. So we want it to move up, of course, so we can press, we can type 90 with 90 degrees, and that means straight up. And you can see that the dot changes. And the speed is kind of fast. We don't want it to be quite that fast, so I'm going to change it to 100. And now if we try that, we press the up arrow key, and it works, which is great. So let's go ahead and add the other behaviors, because right now it can only move up. And we could do this manually, but that takes a lot of time. It's not necessary. A trick you can use in GameSalad is copy and paste. So you can click to select a behavior like this and do your computer's copy command and then do paste. And you can see a new copy appears down here. So I'll paste 2 more because we need 4 total, 1 for each key. And then I can go into each one and edit it. So this one is going to be left. I'll change the keyboard to left and then change the direction to 180 because that's to the left. And for this one, we'll do down. And You can see that we don't have to change the direction or the speed because the speed is the same as it was when we copied it. But the direction is 270 for down. And finally, for the right key, move to the right. And the direction there is 0. Or 360, it's the same. And so now if we run the game, I can press each of the arrow keys and the raindrop moves. So that's great. We've already got our control. Look how easy it was to take control. Good job. But there's no collision. The raindrop just moves right over the cloud. So that's no good. We need to do that next. And before we do that, you can see that the behavior is already pretty cluttered. It's hard to move through because each of these takes up a lot of space. So there's a trick you can use in GameSalad, which is that in the upper left of every behavior, there's this arrow, and you can click it to collapse, like a drawer, the particular behavior, and then you can expand it again. In this case, since we have all of these rules and they're all pertaining to the same thing, which is movement, I'm going to use this other button here, which is create group. And that doesn't do anything on its own. It just gives you an easy way to remind yourself of behaviors that should go together. So now I'll drag each of these movement rules into this group. And you'll see why that's useful in a moment. And then I can double click on the word group. Actually, I won't do that yet. So now you can see there's this sort of box around all of the 4 movement commands. And why is that useful? Well, now I can click this one arrow and the whole thing gets hidden, whereas before I would have had to click each of them individually. So that's very handy. The one thing to note is that group by itself, it doesn't tell you anything about what's inside, so you'd have to click this and open it and look at it to figure that out. But you can double click on the word group and type something else. So I'll do movement. And now I have a shorthand to know what's inside this. So the next thing we need to do is collision. And we want to make it so that the raindrop can't move through the cloud. And there's a behavior called collide. And it says bounce when colliding if actor of type whatever, and it defaults to cloud, so that's good. Bounce, I mean, it's sort of misleading because really it just means you can't pass through the cloud. But anyway, that's what it's called in GameSalad. So now if we run the game, I'm going to run right into the cloud and whoa, what just happened there? All right, let's try that again. All right, so weird things are happening. What is happening there? Well, GameSalad has a basic physics engine built in. So it's going to try, if you do some sort of collision that would have physics in real life. I'm just moving around here. This is crazy. It's going to try to simulate sort of what that interaction will be like in reality. So I can push the cloud out of the way, and then it starts rotating, and it keeps going because there's no friction. And the raindrop, it's doing this weird rotation because it gets a little bit of impetus back from the cloud. So that's kind of cool and weird, but very not helpful for our game. Because if you could just push the walls out of the way, then the game would be really easy and stupid. And we don't want to create an easy and stupid game, so let's go back and fix this. And what we need to do is tell the cloud not to move if the raindrop pushes it. And so for that, we need to click back to go out of the raindrop and open up the cloud actor. And now look at the list of attributes. And you remember how we set the tiling before with graphics? Well, now we're going to scroll down and we can hide the graphics again. But now we're going to expand physics. And don't get intimidated, this is not as scary as it looks. We can ignore most of these things, but you'll see there's a checkbox for movable. And that just means that the cloud can be moved if it's checked. So we can uncheck that. And now if we run the game, the cloud can't be moved, which is awesome. One other thing though, you may notice that if you happen to run into the cloud in a certain way, like this, the raindrop still starts rotating. There's nothing stopping the raindrop from still getting some result from that collision. So we need to fix that too. And we can click back and open up the raindrop again and scroll down to its own physics. Now if we unchecked movable, that would not help us because then we couldn't move the raindrop at all. This rule would be useless. So we need to leave it unmovable. But there's another one for fixed rotation. And if we check that, that means that the raindrop can't be rotated. it just stays vertical, and that's what we want. So make sure to check that. And now if we run the game, we can run the raindrop into the cloud however we want, and it's not going to rotate. So that very simple solution to a weird problem, which is great. So now we have our basic interaction. We have the walls made up by the cloud and the raindrop. So good job, us. What do we want to do next? Well, we have the basics of the maze itself, the wall. And it's tempting to go ahead and build the rest of the level with all the paths and so on, but you need to remember that what makes this game work is the interaction between the navigation through the maze itself and the danger of running into the smog. So the smog is going to affect how we design the level. So we should probably create the smog next. And the way to do that is actually, I'm going to go back to this and just take a look at how this works. You have this factory down here, and then it's generating the smog, and the smog shoots upward. So how would we create that in our version of the game? Well, we have a factory actor, so let's go ahead and make a copy of that. I'll just drag that in. And by the way, you can see that there's not a lot of vertical room with this particular platform, GameSalad Arcade. So one thing you can do is you can move actors partly off screen, like this. And you can see the bottom of it is outside of the bounds of the screen. That's fine. That just means that only the top part will be visible. So you can only see the top of the factory. So take advantage of that. That can help you with space concerns. We could do the same thing with the cloud if we wanted to. Still works. Okay, I'll go ahead and move this back down, but I'll leave the factory. So now we have the factory, which is great. But what do we do about the smog? Well, we could drag a copy of the smog in, like we've been doing. But if you look at this version of the game, it looks like the smog is being generated by the factory. And of course, that's how factories actually work. So wouldn't it be nice if we could make the factory do that in our game? Well, of course we can. And so let's do that. So I'm going to delete this copy of the smog and go into the factory. And there's a behavior called spawn actor. So you can drag that into the factory. And let's look at what it offers. So we have an actor that we're choosing to spawn, so we'll choose the smog. And for direction, you probably don't want to mess with that. That basically just means which way the smog is facing, which doesn't make a lot of sense with the smog because it looks the same from every angle. It's basically just a square. But with the raindrop, if you change the direction that it was spawned, then it might be on its side or upside down. And that can cause problems later if you're doing motion. So I recommend just leaving the direction at 0. And position, we'll just leave that the way it is for the moment. So now what we're saying is as soon as we run the game, the factory should spawn a copy of the smog. So let's try it. And there it is. But it's not quite right, is it? You can see we have a few problems right off the bat. One is that it's really hard to see the smog against the background because it's black on black. Another is that the smog's appearing in the wrong place. And a third is that the smog's just sitting there. So lots of problems. Let's fix all of them. I hope you don't have anywhere to go because we're going to fix all these problems. Actually, it's pretty easy. So the first thing is the color. Of course, if you look at this version of the game, there's a nice light blue background for the sky, and that looks a lot more pleasant than what we have. So let's take care of the background first. So click back to go back to the scene view. And now what you're going to do is go up here to the inspector and click on the scene tab. And then look in the list of attributes, and you'll see there's one for color. And you can click on the color and get this pop-up. And the middle icon here, if you hover over it, it says color palettes. You can choose colors. So let's try cyan. That's a little bright. All right, forget cyan. We'll just do blue. Okay. And now if we go back to, we can close this. And now go back to the game tab. And run the game again, and now we don't have a problem with the color contrast anymore. So that's good. But the next thing to fix is where the smog appears. And if we look at the factor's behavior again, you can see that the default position is 0, 0. So what that means is the smog is being created at the center of the factory, which is spawning it. And if you go back and look at the game, So the center of the smog would be here. So remember where that is in relation to the factory. And now if we click back and click on the factory, you can see that's where the center of the factory image is. It's a little weird because the factory is down here, so you might think the center would be down here, but the factory image includes this space above it. It's kind of strange. But here's where the center is, and that's where the smog gets created. But we don't want it to be there, we want it to be up here. So we need to adjust the position. And you can see this arrow is pointing to the right. That's units in the x-axis, and this is up units in the y-axis. So I know from doing this before that if we do 20 units to the right and 30 units upward, and this is from the center of the factory, that will be about right. So if we run the game, now it's appearing where we want it to appear. You might want to move it over maybe to be centered over both of them. I just did it over the main pipe. It's all good. So we've solved two problems. Now it's in the right place, but it's not moving. So we need to take care of that. And the way we do that is actually not in the factory, because now we're dealing with the behavior of the smog itself. So we need to open up the smog. And of course we used the move behavior before, so we can use it again. But this time it's not going to be conditional, because we're not pressing a key to move the smog, it's moving on its own. So we need to set the direction, and we want the smog to move upwards, so you may remember that's 90 degrees. And for the speed, maybe we'll do 150. This is the sort of thing you just do trial and error until you find the things that you want. So let's go ahead and run that. Now what we're saying is when there's a smog, when there's one smog, it should move upward. So if we run the game, it works, which is great. So we've solved all the problems, right? Well, not quite. You may notice there's no additional smog, as opposed to this one where there's a new smog every few seconds. You never heard smog being talked about like this. You can count the smogs. That's a game in and of itself. Just count the smogs. No, don't count the smog. But we need to make it so that there's more than one smog. So for that, we go back into the factory, and we're pretty much done with the smog itself. And we need to tell it to do this every once in a while. So there's another behavior for that, and that's called timer. And you can see it defaults to every 5 seconds. So that sounds about right. Let's move the spawn actor behavior into the timer. So now every 5 seconds it runs this behavior and makes a new smog. Let's try it. All right, there's a smog. So it counted up to 5 seconds and then it made a smog. And now, it's going to keep doing that. That's a little slow, so I'm going to change my interval to 3 seconds. Try that. Yeah, that's better. You can do what works for you. If it's faster, the game will be harder. If it's slower, the game will be easier. You can change the speed of the smog, too. So that's great. Now we've got our factory making the smog, but it's not much of a hazard because there's no collision with the raindrop. So that's the next thing to create. And so for that, we're going to go into the raindrops behavior. And you could do this either in the smog or in the raindrop, because either one would let you set a collision rule with the other. But we might as well do it in the raindrop. So we're not going to use the collide behavior this time because we don't want the raindrop to bounce off the smog. We want it to be destroyed. So for that, we're going to create a rule. And we'll say, we'll just name this destroy upon collision. And again, remember, the name doesn't really matter. It's just a reminder to you of what's inside the behavior. And then we'll change mouse position to overlaps or collides with actor of type small. And then we'll use one of my favorite behaviors in GameSalad, destroy. So this is very simple. It just says if the raindrop collides with smog, destroy the raindrop. Let's try it. Yeah, look at that. That raindrop's out of there. All right, so that's great. What do we want to do next? Well, let's go ahead and build more of the maze now because we've got our hazard. So click back to go back to the scene view, and I'm going to go ahead and make this wider to fill the whole width. And by the way, you can expand it beyond the bounds of the screen. Remember that we already sort of saw that with the factory. That's fine. It just that will ensure that it covers the screen. And then I'll make a few more copies to get this. We're going to make a box, basically. And again, you'd want to take the time to really do this nicely. I'm doing it quickly just for the sake of the tutorial, but put in the time to make a nice level, at least once you decide what the final design of the level will be. Okay, so this will do for now. And now we have our box. You know what, I don't really need this to be all the way like that. Now we have our box. And so let's go ahead and run the game. Well, this just looks so hideous. So you can see that the downside, there is still that downside of tiling. It still looks weird, but it's a pretty good compromise. So let's run the game. And you'll notice if you watch the Smog, something weird happens, which is that the smog travels underneath the cloud. It looks really weird. Why is that? Well, by default, GameSalad displays things in the order that you add them to the scene. So things that you add later will appear on top of the things you added before. That's no good for us. We want the smog to always be on top. So we can do that. There's one more part. If we go into the factory again and look at the spawn actor behavior, there's this thing called layer order. And the layer is what controls what gets drawn in front of what by GameSalad. So the default is in front of the actor, so that just means that smog appears on top of the factory. But we want it to appear in front of everything, so we can change this to front of layer. And that means as long as everything's in the same layer, which it will be for this tutorial, the smog will always appear in front. So now if we run it, even though we added the cloud later, after the smog still appears on top. So that's great. Well, we're doing well, but we're still missing an important part of our game, which is a goal. There's nowhere for the raindrop to go. It's just trapped inside the box, dodging the smog, which is kind of lame. So let's add a goal. And you may remember that in the other version, we had the star, and the star was sort of the escape from the maze. So let's add a star. So we'll go back and drag a copy of the star in. Now, you can put this wherever you like, obviously. Probably makes sense to put it along the bottom since the raindrop's trying to escape the cloud and fall to Earth. You can put it wherever. I'm going to go ahead and put it down here. Whoops. It's hard to move things that are small. Notice that if I just put it on top of the cloud, that's not going to work. Because even though we haven't said anything about colliding with the star, the cloud's still there, and it prevents me from moving. So I need to move this out of the way to make some space. And another thing you're going to run into with GameSalad is you may think that a gap is big enough for your actor, because that raindrop's pretty skinny, so this should be enough space, right? Well, not necessarily. That's why it's important to preview. Even though the raindrop's small, its collision box that determines where it collides is a little bit bigger than the graphic, and the collision GameSalad, it's a little wonky. I mean, it's good, but what you see may not necessarily be what's actually colliding. So I can't get through this gap. So for that reason, I need to make sure that there's plenty of room. And that's why it's important to test your paths to make sure you can get through them easily. Otherwise, your player will get frustrated. See, now this is a lot better. It's a little wider than maybe it needs to be, but that's good, because that means I'm less likely to be a little bit off. See, that looks like I could make it, but I can't. So now I'll go ahead and put the star back in place. There we go. Great, so now I've got my goal, but I can just move right through it because we need to say something about the collision. So since we're going to have the raindrop sort of escape the maze and win when it moves into the star, it makes sense to destroy it when it runs into the star too. So we can actually go back to the raindrop and use the same destroy upon collision rule, but now we're going to add an additional condition. And the way to do that is to click this plus button. Now there's a new condition, and it's going to look very similar to the previous one, but now it's collision with the star. So now it should be that if it collides with either one, then it gets destroyed. Let's try. But something weird happens. I can still move through the star. It's like I didn't make any changes. And then if we happen to collide with the smog, you'll see that it's no longer destroying the raindrop. So somehow we've broken the destruction rule. Why is that? Well, look a little more closely up here. It says when all conditions are valid. That's the default. That would mean that the raindrop would have to be colliding with both the smog and the star simultaneously for it to be destroyed, which isn't going to happen, and it doesn't make sense for us to ask for that. So for that, we need to go up and change all to any. And now it should work if it collides with either of them. And if we run that, it gets destroyed when I run through the star, and it gets destroyed by the smog. So that's great. So what should we do now? Let's go ahead and add, well, right now you can't really tell the difference between winning and losing, right? Either way, the raindrop gets destroyed. But the goal of this game ultimately is to make a multiple level game. So if you get the raindrop to the exit, it moves to the next level. So let's go ahead and add a new level so that we can see this in action. And the way to do that is to click back to the scene view. And now you can probably either click back or the home button, and it'll take you back to these tabs. You want to make sure you've selected the scenes tab. And now we'll click the plus button to add a new scene. And so for this scene, let's just add a few elements. I'm not going to spend a lot of time prettying up this. That's for you to do later. But we'll just add a little bit so there's sort of a basic interaction. Okay, and then we'll make a factory down here, and a goal. All right, and if this is going to work, we haven't really said anything for making the raindrop move to the next level. So we need to do that. And the way we can do that is by going back into this scene. Well, it doesn't have to be this scene, but going into the star. And we'll say create a rule. And now we're going to say if this actor, the star, receives a collision with the raindrop, we'll use a new behavior in the library, which is called change scene. There it is. And you can see it defaults to next scene. And this is nice because if there is another scene afterward, then GameSalad will go there. And if not, I think it'll go back to the first scene. So it's pretty flexible. But now if we run the game, it should be the case that if we collide with a smog, it gets destroyed. The raindrop does, but nothing else happens. And then if we reset and move into, oh, see? All right, it worked. So I moved into the star and I jumped straight to the next level. And if I do this, then I go back to the first level. That's a little abrupt. It might be confusing for the player if they happen to move into the star and instantaneously go to the next level. They won't necessarily understand what happened. So for that reason, it's good to put in a little bit of delay. And one way we can do that is by using a timer again. Now, instead of saying every, we'll say after. We'll say 2 seconds. Change scene. So this says now, if there's a collision between the raindrop and the star, count to 2 seconds and then change the level. So if we run that, 1001, 1002, well, that's weird. It's obviously been more than 2 seconds, but it's not moving to the next level, so something's wrong. And it's a logical thing. This is all logic. So if you're running into a problem, just try to think about the logic of your situation and what might be not working. And in this case, look at the condition here. This is saying if there's that collision, count to 2 and then go to the next scene. This timer, it's only going to count if there is currently a collision between the raindrop and the star. And the problem is the raindrop destroys itself as soon as it touches the star. So that collision, it's only happening for a moment, so the timer starts counting, but then the raindrop is destroyed and the timer stops counting. It never reaches the 2 seconds and it never goes to the next scene. And for that reason, there's this run to completion option. If you check that, then the collision will start the timer And then even if the collision stops because the raindrop is destroyed, the timer will still complete its mission. So it'll finish counting the 2 seconds and then it'll go to the next scene. And if we test that out, it works. And now we've got a nice pause for the player to see that the raindrop vanished, and then it changes to the next level, which is very fluid. So that's good. Now, what is the next thing that we want to do? Well, we've pretty much got all the components of our game now, so give yourself a pat on the back. We're doing really well. But if you go back and look at this version of the game, you can see that you control multiple raindrops, not just one. And so we should add that. And you might think that it would be hard to add more characters and have you control them all simultaneously, but I'm going to let you in on a big secret. It's actually not hard at all. It's very easy. In fact, if I go ahead and add some raindrops in, I don't have to do any other work. Simply by adding those raindrops to the scene, now if I run it, I'm controlling all of them. And the reason for that is that they're all instances of that prototype. And we assign the movement behavior and all those other behaviors to the prototype. So all of the instances, they get that behavior. And GameSalad still knows that there's a difference between each copy of the prototype. So if I happen to lose one to the Smog, the others don't get destroyed. It's just the one. And similarly, if I run one into a wall, the other one keeps moving, which means I can change the spacing between them. But I still can control them all simultaneously. And now they've completely overlapped, so it looks like one, but you get the idea. Which is awesome. So that was really easy. So what should we do now? Well, you may notice a problem if you're trying this out, which is that I get a raindrop to the goal, and then I'm moving around my other rain. Oh, see, the game noticed that a raindrop hit the goal, and so it triggered the behavior to move to the next level. And that's because even though it knows how to tell the difference between the 3 raindrops, the rules of the game just say that if one collides with the star, the goal, go to the next level. So I don't really have a chance to play with my other raindrops, which is very disruptive. And we could make our game work like that. We could make it so if you get one to the goal, then you win right away. And similarly, maybe if we put a lose condition in, then if you lose one raindrop, then the game could restart or something like that. But it'd be more interesting, and it would also be in line with the other version of the game if even after you lose a raindrop, either because it reaches the goal or because it's destroyed by the Smog, you can still play with the other raindrops. And for that to work, we need to have a system so that GameSalad knows how many raindrops there are and only takes action depending on how many raindrops there are. So we're going to need a way to count them. And so let's do that next. So click back, and what we need to do is we need to create a new attribute, which is going to be a sort of a container for counting how many raindrops there are. So in the inspector, make sure that the game tab is selected because we're going to want to create this attribute so any scene in the game can use it. And then click on attributes. And now click the plus button in the lower left. And it'll ask to choose an attribute. In this case, we want to just count, so you can choose integer. And you can see it appears down here. It has a default value of 0. New attribute, not a very helpful name. So double click on that, and I'm going to call it num raindrops, short for number of raindrops. You can call it whatever you like. Now, of course, this is not going to count on its own. It doesn't know what num raindrops means. So we have to give behavior, just like anything else in GameSalad, to make this work. So how would we do that? Well, it's really easy. Basically, we just add another line to the raindrop. There's another behavior in GameSalad called change attribute. And so which attribute do we want to change? Well, we want to change the one we just created. So click on that triple dot, and you get the attribute browser. And then remember, it's a game level attribute. So click on game, because we created it for the game. And then double click on num raindrops. And there it is. What do we want to change it to? Well, the idea is we want, for every raindrop, to add one to num raindrops. So click on this little letter E, and that opens what's called the expression editor. And then in the lower left, click this arrowhead, and you'll open the same attribute browser as before. So choose num raindrops. But now, by double-clicking on it, it appears up here, but I have a cursor flashing to the right. And so I can type +1 and click the green check mark. And all this is saying is change whatever the current value of num raindrops is to that value +1. And this behavior, since it's not inside of any condition, it's only going to run as soon as the raindrop is created. So that means every time there's a raindrop in the scene, it's going to add 1 to num raindrops. And it's only going to do that once. So you can probably guess, just like we add 1 to num raindrops when the raindrop is created, we can subtract 1 when it's destroyed. So we're basically going to copy the same behavior. So you can just do your copy command again, and then go into the destroy upon collision rule. And now we can paste that change attribute in. I don't think the order matters. You can these things happen simultaneously. So even though this is change attribute after the actor is destroyed, it's still going to happen at the same time. So, but we don't want to change that num raindrops to +1 in this case. We want to change it to -1 because it's being destroyed. So you can click on this and just change that plus to a, oops, let me move that over here. Change the plus to a minus and then click the green again. All right, so now when the raindrop appears, it adds 1 to num raindrops, and when it's destroyed, it subtracts 1 from num raindrops. That's our counter, and that's all there is to it. It's very simple. But of course, if we run the game, that's still not going to make any perceptible difference because we haven't done anything with that count yet. That's the next thing to do. So for that, we're going to go back into the star. Because remember, the star is what's controlling the jump to the next level. But now, we actually don't need it to collide with the raindrop anymore. Because before we were saying move to the next level when there's a collision. But now we're not concerned about that. We're concerned about whether there are any raindrops. Because we want the player to be able to play all of the raindrops out. So that only after there are 0 raindrops left on screen do you do something. So we're going to want to check if there are 0 raindrops. That will be the condition. So for that, we're going to go up here and click actor receives event and change it to attribute. So now we're going to check the value of an attribute. And which attribute? Well, it's going to be num raindrops. So once again, game num raindrops. And then you can see the default here is equals, so that's right. And the default here is 0. So now the rule is checking if there are 0 raindrops. Only then will it run the change scene behavior. And for this reason, since it's not relying on a collision anymore, we don't need this run to completion. Because as soon as there are 0 raindrops, there's going to keep being 0 raindrops. There's not going to be new raindrops appearing. So this timer will keep running. And let's test that out. 1 raindrop. Level does not reset, or it doesn't go to the next level, even though it's been more than 2 seconds. So next raindrop, still playing. Final raindrop, wait 2 seconds, goes to the next level. Now we just have the 1 raindrop, run that into the goal, wait 2 seconds, goes to the next level, which is back to the first level. Awesome. What we've just done is pretty powerful. You're going to do this a lot. We've made a new attribute and used it to do something that's sort of not default in GameSalad, which is to count how many of something there is, and then do behavior based on that. So really remember this technique. It's very useful. But there's a problem with how we've implemented it, which you may have thought of already, which is if I run my raindrops into the smog, so I've lost all of them, it still goes to the next level, even though none of them reached the goal. Why is that? Well, remember, the logic of the rule now checks for if there's 0 raindrops. And that happens whether the raindrop is destroyed by the smog or by the star. There's no way for the game to differentiate between when we've won and when we've lost. That was the advantage of the collision rule before. But now we want to do it this way. So we have to think of another way to tell whether the player has made it or not. So how do we do that? Well, we're probably going to want to create another attribute. Because we basically want to signal to GameSalad if a raindrop reaches the star, then the level has been won. That might not necessarily mean that the level changes right away, because we still want the player to play out the other raindrops, but we still want it to be the case that if one of them reaches the goal, then once they're 0, go to the next level. So let's do that. Let's click back and remember to select the Game tab again, and then on Attributes, create another one. Now in this case, we're not going to do an integer. In this case, we're going to use what's called a Boolean. And a Boolean it's basically an on-off switch. It can only take the value true or false. So create that, and I'm going to call mine 1 level. And there's a checkbox here. When it's not checked, that means that the Boolean starts out with the value of false. So 1 level is false. And if it's checked, then 1 level starts out as true. But of course, we don't want the level to start out as 1, so we want this to be clear, so that 1 level starts out with the value of false. And the idea is if one of the raindrops reaches the star, then we change 1 level to be true. So how would we do that? Oops. Well, we would go back into the star, and we actually are going to need that collision rule again that we got rid of before. So we can create a new rule and change mouse position to overlaps or collides and make it with the raindrop. So once again, the star is checking to see if it collides with the raindrop. But now we use the change attribute behavior again. And this time we're going to change game 1 level to true. And you have to type it out, but that's okay. You just have to type the word true. So hopefully you have good spelling. That's how you spell it. Spell it like that. All right. And of course, this on its own, once again, it's not going to have the necessary effect. It's going to change 1 level to true, but we're not doing anything with 1 level. So we have another step to do before we'll see results. But this part is just saying that as soon as one of the raindrops reaches the star, then the level is marked as 1. But now we need to go back up to our rule that changes the scene. And we have to check whether the player has 1 level or not. And for that, we're going to need an additional rule. So let's see. I don't really want one of them selected. If you click a rule and then you click create rule, it's going to create a rule around the current rule, and that's not what we want in this case. So make sure nothing is selected, and then click create rule. And here's a new rule. And so for this, we're going to want to check if the attribute game 1 level is true. So if the player has 1 level by reaching the goal with one of the raindrops. And then we're going to need to move that rule. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this just to get it out of the way. So let's leave a note. This is note level as 1. Now we're going to need to move this rule in here. And then we only want the timer to count to 2 and then the scene to change if the player has won the level. So we need to move this inside this. So we have a nested rule set here. The first thing that the game does is it checks if there are 0 raindrops. If there are 0 raindrops, it checks if the player has won the level. If the player has won the level, it counts up to 2 and then it changes the level. So let's try that. All right, now I got all my raindrops through. 2 seconds later, it changes the level. And now if I lose this raindrop, I can wait 2 seconds. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, yes, of course. That's the other thing that we need to do. Cancel that dramatic demonstration. I'm going to come back to it. An important thing to realize about attributes is that they keep their current value unless you tell them otherwise. So remember, when that first raindrop collided with the star, it changed 1 level to true. And the thing is, when it moved to the next scene, it didn't change 1 level back to false. So 1 level was still set to true. which meant that when I lost my raindrop to the smog, the game thought that I had basically beaten the level because one level was still set to true, and so it changed the level, it changed the scene anyway. So for that reason, we need to do something else when we change the scene, which is that we need to change one level back to false. So I'm going to copy this behavior and then paste it in here. But now instead of changing one level to true, it's going to be false. So all we're saying here is that if there are 0 raindrops and one level is true, so the players reach the goal, then wait 2 seconds and then change to the next scene, but also change one level back to false. So then the player will have to reach the goal again before he or she'll be able to move on to the next level. So let's try it now. Hopefully I didn't screw it up. All right, so here go all my raindrops. 2 seconds later, move to the next level. Now I'm gonna lose my raindrop. Perfect. So it doesn't change the level. So you've done it right. And you can note something important here, which is that if I lose one to the smog, but I make one to the goal, even if I've lost the others to the smog, it still goes to the next level, which is exactly what we wanted it to do. Because we've said as long as one makes it, and it doesn't matter which one, as long as one makes it to the goal, whenever that happens, as long as one makes it, then the level is 1. Perfect. All right. Then the other thing that we want to do is we don't really have a lose condition. So when I lose my raindrop, the game just sits there. It's pretty boring. We need to do something about that. So we haven't really used what's called otherwise in anything yet, but we're going to do it now. Think again about how the logic of this works. We're saying if there are 0 raindrops, well, first of all, check how many raindrops there are. If there are 0, do something, which is to check if one level is true. And if it is, then do something. But we can also specify what should happen if one of these checks fails. So we could say what should happen if there's not 0 raindrops, if there are any raindrops still in the field, but we don't really want to do anything for that right now. But we do want to say what happens if there are 0 raindrops, but one level is false, meaning none of the raindrops reach the goal before being destroyed. So for that, we can look at this otherwise down here and click the arrow to expand it. And you'll see there's behavior for this as well. There's a place to put behavior. So what do we want to do in that case? Well, probably we want to restart the scene, give the player another chance. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just copy the same timer event and paste it in here. But instead of change scene, I'm going to use the behavior called reset scene. Oops, that should be inside the timer. And we also don't need this change attribute command because the only reason that this behavior is running is because one level is still false, so we don't need to set it back to false. So now we're saying if it finds that there are 0 raindrops, then go ahead and move to the next step. But in that next step, if you won the level, move to the next level, and if not, otherwise, move back to the same level, restart the level. So let's try it. So here I'm beating the level. I made one to the goal, so I can lose the others. It doesn't matter. I move to the next level, the next scene. Now I'm going to lose my raindrop. Then the scene restarts. And of course that's true in the first scene as well. So if I lose all of them, then it restarts. Perfect. And of course you can play with the timing and do whatever you want, but that's the basic idea. We've established a win condition and a lose condition, which is the goal. So what do we still have to do? I believe that's essentially it. Yeah, really, this is obviously a very primitive version of the game because I haven't taken the time to build out the levels and polish it up and make more levels and so on. I mean, this is the second level, right? This is not much of a level. Neither is the first one because you're not getting any of those nice paths that you have in the first version of the game, or in the web version. But that's okay because what we've covered is all of the basic mechanisms of the game. We've set up our win condition and our lose condition. We've put all the rules in place so you have the multiple raindrops and you can move them around and they get destroyed by the right things and they trigger the right events when they reach the goal, and everything that we need to make a nice game is in place. So really, at this point, it's up to you what you want to do next. So the goal of the tutorial now, well, the tutorial is done, but the goal for you is to build a 3-level version of Smog Cloud Madness. So what you want to do is start with this framework and build out a set of really nice levels, preferably ones that look different than the ones in the web version. Although feel free to take those as a model of inspiration and then modify them. This is your chance to be creative. This game is more about level design because with a maze game, really the whole game is the levels. You know, the hazards are there and they work in concert with the level design, but primarily it's about the mazes. So here's your chance to be creative and make all kinds of crazy mazes. A couple of notes about that. One thing that you're going to want to do, or what I recommend anyway, for one thing, you'll definitely want to preview often. So you want to make sure that you're testing out your game and making sure that everything works. Because the last thing that you want to do is spend a long time building a really elaborate path, maybe something like this, and then you find out that you can't get a raindrop through one of the corridors or something like that. Especially because the collision can be a little strange and unpredictable. You really want to test it often. And you also want to make sure that you don't build something that's impossible to beat. If you can't beat your own level, then you can pretty much guarantee nobody else will be able to either. Some level design notes. Exploit the fact that you're controlling multiple characters. Now in the web version of the game, there are several different levels. And this one, you have the 3 raindrops. This one, you just have the 1. Then here, you're back to several. But think about what it means to be controlling several at the same time. You can't just watch one character. You have to split your attention because every movement command applies to all the raindrops. And if they're against the wall, then they're not going to go anywhere. It's not a concern. But you might have a situation where you accidentally move a raindrop right into the path of the smog. For example, if I'm moving the top raindrop to the left and we're watching that one, oops, all right, that was a bad example. But you can see that because they're all moving in concert, you can be watching one and not be watching the other, and you move the other right into danger. So exploit that. Design levels that require you to split your attention because it's more interesting that way. The other tip is to create tension. Especially if you just have a limited number of factories, it's great to create scenarios that make you crisscross the smog multiple times. So here, for example, you have to cross it at this point, also at this point, and at this point. Pretty good for such a limited vertical range. And then here, you have this awful moment where you have to move towards the generation of the smog. And you're not totally sure that you'll have enough time to make it through and get out before the smog gets you. So create lots of opportunities like that. They're really interesting. And yeah, lots of crisscrossing across the paths of the smog, and just take advantage of the potential that's offered here. Another thing that you can think about in terms of how to improve the game is, for one thing, we've made it so that you only have to get one to the goal. And then you can still play the others, but it doesn't really matter what happens to them. So you might think of a way that you could reward it if you get everybody to the goal on time, or get everyone to the goal without losing anybody. What reward could the player be offered? The other thing to think about is that platform's game screen size really matters here. We've chosen GameSalad Arcade so we can post it on the web, and that means we have to work within the size. But this is predominantly a vertical game because the smog is going vertically, and you want to make lots of paths, and there's not really room for that in these bounds. So you might be better served by creating a bigger, like targeting a device with a bigger screen, maybe a vertically oriented screen. You could do a lot more with the levels that way. But anyway, that's it. Thanks so much for watching, and tune in for the other tutorials, and bye for now.